In our first book, we called it The Day Before Vacation Miracle. The first thing you time block every year is your vacation time. You don't have to pre-book. When you get closer and you feel safe buying that ticket to Japan, you can buy it a lot closer to the date knowing the time has already been set aside. Here's the trick to the whole morning routine. We have the most willpower to make the best possible decisions early in the day. The hours before work begins, you have a lot of control of your time. I think those two decisions are why so many successful people have morning rituals. There's a great book called The Road Less Stupid. The number one culprit for most entrepreneurs is they don't have any thinking time. If you're just barely making it now, I don't think it's the hours that you put in your business. If hours were the answer, there wouldn't be people like Gary Keller and Elon Musk. But it's not about the number of hours, it's about what they're doing with the hours.
Hello, Jay.
Hey, Andy.
How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. How's my audio on my end?
I'm hearing an echo of my voice on your side.
Okay, let me try.
But not horrible. Not horrible.
I'm going to change it to Zoom background noise removal. Okay. Does this sound any different?
Test 1, 2, 3.
Testing
Yeah,
1, 2, 3.
it does. Wow.
Okay, cool.
Good adjustment. Good adjustment.
I was testing this thing that called live performance audio, and I guess it's not that good. It's a Zoom audio setting.
Yeah, well, it sounded like an auditorium. So maybe that's what it was meant to do. So maybe if you're playing music, it would sound cool.
That's exactly it. When I was clicking that little eye on information, it was like it's designed for Zoom music related things if there's a lot of different instruments. So you somehow hit the nail on the head.
Well, I know sometimes in those rich, you hear a band in a small setting, there's a certain amount of echo that your brain doesn't process, but it adds to the depth. When I'm on a really big stage, if they don't have the monitors on, have you ever spoken from kind of a big stage?
I've not.
The first time I did it, I didn't know this. I was speaking with Gary in front of a room of 8,000 people, huge convention hall. And when you speak and you're magnified, there's the sound you hear of your own voice in your own head. And then there's the sound that goes all the way to the back of the room and echoes back. And when it's your voice, it's fine because you're hearing it in your head. But whenever Gary would speak, like I would get some of it from his voice that went straight to my ears in that space. And then it was being overwhelmed. And like I couldn't understand him for all the 90 minutes we were on stage. I was just guessing what he was saying and pretending to answer him. After that, I realized why musicians have the earpieces or they have really good sound monitors right in front of them, because otherwise it's the sound travels in all these different places and it all comes back on you.
That
It's
makes
probably
sense.
a lot more information than you need, but it's at the end of the day here. Is it the beginning of the day for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's
So
your
my willpower, if you know the book, is probably running a little low. So if I get off track, just interrupt me.
Totally fine. So you just mentioned willpower, Jay. What's your thoughts on all these different morning routines everyone talks about? Cold plunges, cold showers, meditation. Is that chipping away at your willpower now that, so as a result, you have less willpower to get your work done?
I think gosh, man, if cold plunges were the answer, like everybody would be millionaires driving Lambos with six-pack abs because everybody I know seems to be cold plunging. I think that the morning routines matter. So anybody who's read all of the works that I've written with Gary, the three best-selling titles, the first book we wrote is called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. And we wrote that in the summer of 2002. We published it the next year, and it sold a little over 1.6 million copies. The next book we wrote was called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And that one sold, I think, 600,000 copies. Both of those were based on interviews primarily, and then we looked for patterns. Then you also know I'm looking the wrong way. The one thing, which is in the background of this video, if they're watching on YouTube, that sold now over 3.5 million copies. But what they all have in common, they all kind of drive towards what's the 20% that matters. The one thing takes that to an extreme, but they all have what we call as an energy plan. And it's basically a series of priorities that you could line up in your morning that would set you up for success. Here's the trick to the whole morning routine. Early in the day, we do have more willpower. And that's because of something called decision fatigue. When you exercise your willpower, which means you have to focus, avoid distractions, make a big decision, like you use willpower if you're watching a sad movie on a date and you're trying not to cry. Like you're actually impacting your brain's ability to make better decisions later. And you can measure your blood sugar before and after using this part of your brain, and it will be measurably down. It's kind of crazy. Your brain is the second most expensive organ in your body. The liver, I think, actually takes more energy to run, but the brain is way up there. So, decision making, you need to be careful that you're making decisions when you still have the ability to really think through them and not go to what's called default mode. And when you have run out of decision making energy, you go to whatever your habitual choice will be. There's a study we unpacked in the book, and I'm not going to go into it unless you really want to go that nerdy. But basically, when a judge is out of willpower and they're on a parole board hearing, they just say, go back to jail because that's the safe choice, right? Might be that person is ready to be released, but if they can't really decide easily, they're going to just say, go back to jail. So I don't know what your default choices are in the afternoon or in the morning. I know my default choice, if I had no willpower, would be like a cheeseburger with bacon, which would kill me rapidly if I ate it all the time. Thankfully, I usually make a lot of my decisions early on. So let's go back to the morning. We have the most willpower to make the best possible decisions early in the day. Some people say, well, what time is morning? Because all these gurus are getting up at 4 a.m. and I'm a night owl. Your morning is when you habitually wake up. So when you wake up, whether that's for me, it's usually, I mean, I had kids that trained me to wake up early because they were crying for a bottle. And I just never stopped getting up early. And I'm thankful. I get up early in the morning, usually before 6 a.m., probably 5:20 to 5:40 is when I wake up without an alarm these days. I know people that work night shifts. I have a friend that's an ER doctor, and her morning fundamentally begins. She gets up like at 8 to say goodbye to her husband so they can at least see each other before he goes to work because they're going to be connected at a different point in the day. But each of those is valid. 5 o'clock for me, 8 a.m. for her. That's when we have this overnight when we rest, these stores are built up. So early in the day, you have the ability to decide. And two, I think that the earlier in the day, everybody else is either still in bed, they're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, they're doing something else and they're not calling you and bothering you. So I tend to see a pattern that the hours before work begins, you have a lot of control of your time. I think those two decisions are why so many successful people have morning rituals. So I unpacked a lot there. There's some science to why we want to do things early in the day. And then there's the reality that in the hours before you show up at work, if you work for someone else, you're your own boss. You can choose to get up an hour early and hit the gym or knock out a novel of that great American novel that you hope to write someday, great Australian novel in your case, whatever that might be. But you have a choice. So one of the default answers I give people who are trying to start something new, and they say something like, I just don't have time. I'll say, do you think you could imagine consistently getting up 30 minutes earlier every day? Do you have daylight savings time where you are, Andy?
Yes, it's going to start in 2 weeks.
Oh, here's a hack for you. I don't know if this comes out, but when daylight savings starts, just keep getting up at the same time. You actually, you're not, everybody else is like, I'm going to sleep in and get my free hour. Well, you can keep getting up at the same time you're already habituated. And guess what? You just got 60 minutes every morning with no sleep deprivation if you keep getting up at that time. So if your old wake up time was 7, you're gonna be waking up at 6 under the new time, which gives you an hour on everybody else's clock, but in your brain it's the same time. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that's a huge hack that only happens if you have daylight savings time. But most people can agree to get up 30 minutes earlier. Like, so you'll have to turn off the TV maybe a little earlier. You might not get to watch the end of the football game or the soccer game or whatever it is you're watching, but you can get by with 30 minutes. And they all agreed that that is well within their capabilities. And then I just say, great, in the morning, I want you to dedicate 30 minutes. Maybe you get your coffee or your tea, you shower, but I want you to go to a place that you can control your focus, right? A quiet place in your house, and just do one thing towards your goal. Now, most people will do more than one thing, but if the finish line is to do one thing, they feel like they've made progress, they give themselves a high five, and they come back tomorrow. But they've made themselves in a tiny fashion a little bit better that day by making progress towards their goal. And I believe in the law of momentum. They will eventually start building momentum because they make that a habit. They built a ritual of focusing on this thing that's really important to them in that 30 minutes every morning and making a tiny bit of progress or a lot, depending on the day. And the people who do that every day often lap the people who have these big chunks of time. They think they're going to work on it, but they're not really focused when they're there. And so they end up doing kind of like I did in college. I would wait till the last minute and stay up all night preparing for the exam. And that got me by, but it wasn't a healthy way to approach my goals. So I've just unpacked a lot. I think morning rituals actually matter. We've written about them 3 times in our books. I think it matters because we can control that time. So if we really want to, we can make it happen. And we have the willpower to say yes to the things we know we need to do, even when we don't want to do them. So I throw all that at you. Does that make sense? Do you have any follow-up questions?
Does that mean during the morning, rather than expending your willpower on a cold shower, going to the gym, it might be smart to using that willpower to write a page of that book, film that YouTube video, build out that online website that you've been wanting to build. Is that a smart idea, or because it seems like people don't go straight to work with all that willpower in the morning?
Um, well, once you've established a habit, it doesn't take much effort. So that's a whole other piece of research, right? Discipline. But building a habit takes a lot of focus and effort and a lot longer than most people think. But if you already get up every day and you do your cold plunge and you go to the gym, you just have to ask the question, do I also have time to do this other thing? And then really make a stand that I've got my existing morning ritual. I'm adding one new element to it. And here's the thing, that this new element is kind of the one ring that rules them all. If the only way I'm going to get my website built or whatever it is, you listed like 3 or 4 things, let's call it your new one thing, is that I have to skip my cold plunge that day, then I'm skipping my cold plunge that day. If that means I have to do a short workout at home versus going to the gym, then that's what I'm going to do. The whole point of the one thing isn't that you only have one thing. It's that you've made it clear what your one thing is and you've given that right of way so that we've all had a period of time where something big that was really important to us really kind of ruled our world. In our first book, we called it The Day Before Vacation Miracle. People who were very undisciplined can become very disciplined the day before vacation. They will get the dog to the shelter or they'll drop it off at the in-laws' house. They'll wrap up all of those things. They'll avoid Instagram and Facebook. They'll turn off their mail delivery. They'll do all the things because they know if they don't do them, they don't get to relax on vacation. They have a strong motivation to have a powerful day. Challenge is we can't live that day before vacation every day, right? But we can live an hour or two in the morning where we're very motivated to do a handful of things that drive a lot of our success. And that to me is the essence of a ritual, a morning ritual. And I think that you just build it one element at a time. My friend Hal Elrod has the morning miracle, the miracle morning. And I love it. But I told him on his podcast, I said, like, my research says you're asking people, they call it savers, 6 new things every day. And I've talked to a lot of people and they said, oh, I did that for a while, but now I just journal. Said for a lot of people, only 1 or 2 of them stuck because you've asked them to divide their willpower 6 different directions. Like if I told him when you go back to rewrite it, and he just did, and he didn't follow my advice, but God bless him, he still helped a lot of people. I would say pick one of the savers and start there. And when that's a habit, then you piggyback on it. You add the next habit. When I finish journaling, I will meditate for 10 minutes. When that's a habit, now just those 2 things happen. You don't even think about it. You brush your teeth, you have a little tea, you go do, your morning yoga, your journal, then you do your meditation, then you add your yoga moves or whatever it is. But it's one thing sequentially after each other And the people that you look up and go, oh my gosh, that person's so disciplined. Look at all the things they do. What they did is they probably built a lot of habits sequentially over time. And that's why they look so disciplined all the time.
Love that,
So
Jay.
you can keep your cold plunge. I personally like a hot tub more, but that's just me. But I get it. I do a lot of hard things already. So jumping in the cold, like maybe it would work. I'm not going to diss it because I know some really smart people who do it. But we work out in the morning. I read in the morning. I have some just fun time with my wife. We work some puzzles together. We compete every single morning. I usually get a little bit of writing in the morning. And then the last thing I do is I look at my calendar and my goals. And if I would tell you from the one thing, when we've really helped a lot of people, we do a challenge every now and then to build a new habit. And we've challenged people in the past. Are you willing every day to look at your goals before you pick up your phone? Most of the distraction in our daily lives right now lives on this digital device that you hold in your hand. A lot of the things that keep us from our most important work are there, and it's easy to fall prey. And I think 85% of people, the first thing they do when they wake up is look at their phone. And that might be because that's their alarm clock. But then what happens? Then they open up Facebook or Instagram or X or whatever, or maybe even worse, they go to the work email. And your work email is where other people's agendas live, right? It's just not a place where you find your focus. So our practice is I'm going to look at my goals. I'm going to look at my calendar and ask the question, does my calendar reflect my goals? If it doesn't, I'm going to cancel some meetings. If it does, I'm going to say, great. Now I can go into the world of email and social where everybody's agendas are coming at me, but I've already said yes to something. If you don't know what you're saying yes to today, you'll say yes to anything that looks good. You'll chase the low-hanging fruit. You'll get distracted. But if that simple act of reminding yourself of what actually is important makes it so much easier to say no. So that to me is like a pivotal morning practice for me personally.
I love that, Jay. That spawned off 7 questions I've wrote down. We'll see if we can get through them.
Fire away, man. I'm sorry. I tend to be, I write books, so I can be a little long-winded. Just raise your hand and I will shut up.
New question. Do you think it's better for willpower for you to be able to just keep talking, go with the flow? And if I do raise my hand, ask new questions, does that break the flow of things? Will that increase the amount of willpower you have to use to go through this conversation versus you just talking at your pace and me letting you go?
Uh, I can do both. I think it's more interesting for us to actually have a conversation. You've just gone into some areas that I've been teaching a lot around lately, and I get excited. And so I get excited and I can be a little long-winded. I'm aware of it, but no, like I would love this to be a conversation. I don't think it impacts, yes, sometimes when someone interrupts you, you forget where you were, but you're taking notes. You'll say, you were just talking about X, and I think we'll be just fine.
Perfect. You just talked about how the first thing you do in the morning is you look at your goals, then you look at your schedule. How do you go about scheduling things? And like, for example, we scheduled in this podcast maybe 2 months out. One, how did you remember that, this podcast was about the one thing? I'm from Sydney, because on the calendar, those notes aren't there. So one, how did you remember things 2 months out? How did you make that yes to something 2 months out? And how do you go ahead scheduling your month to month, year to year?
So the way we work our calendars is, the parable of the big rocks where the teacher comes in and he has a pile of big rocks, he has a pile of sand and a pile of, gravel and a pile of water. And the whole point is like, what order do you put them in to get them all in the jar, right? You know that parable?
Mm,
If you put the big rocks in, then the gravel will fall beneath them, and then the sand, and then the water. If you get them out of order, it's a problem.
mm.
So I usually start with a month at a glance. So does Gary. And my number one activity is writing days. So I don't always successful to get a large writing block. Like right now, I'm trying to write between 8 and 11, 5 days a week because I have a deadline. Normally, that would be 4 days a week because we have businesses to run, and Mondays, I get everything out of the way. But I start by blocking off the time I know I will need to hit my big goals. I try to do it early in the morning. Sometimes I have to pick up some slack on the mornings and the weekends. I try to avoid it, but like I'm on a deadline to get a manuscript to the publisher. So like it's go time. It's not how I want to work all the time, but that's where I am. But the writing days go on first. We also have habitual things that we do. So my wife and I, gosh, we've been doing this for probably 14 years now, 15 years. We have a date night on Wednesday nights. It started when our kids were really little. We had no family in town. So, like, for the first 4 years, we just didn't have any dates by ourselves. And finally, our youngest got old enough where we felt comfortable hiring a babysitter. And the problem was, if you try to hire a babysitter on a Saturday or a Friday night, I don't know if you have kids or not, but man, it's very competitive. All of the other parents are trying to get the same neighborhood teenagers to watch their kids. So we just moved it to Wednesday night. So Wednesday night, everybody in my world knows is date night. And as a result, my wife and I think she's added it up. We've gone on over 750 dates since we started. Because we also get to go on dates other times. So that's something that I've kind of in my mind, Wednesday nights are for my wife. So I kind of say no to everything that's not like a travel that thing we have to do. We generally, that's already reserved. So parts of our calendar are already blocked off, like my writing time. We have a family Zoom meeting that we started in COVID, and it happens at 6 o'clock on Sunday nights. And I get to see my sister, my mom, my nieces, my nephews, my brother-in-law. I used to get to see Wendy's dad. He passed away recently, but I'm so glad we did that every week. So there are parts of my calendar that are already spoken for. So the big rocks are there. Now, one of my priorities, believe it or not, is to say yes to podcast interviews. When you write a book, we spent 4.5 years working on the one thing. Part of my job is also to promote and talk about it until it's no longer a viable product. So I tell my assistant, Carly is probably who you were talking to. She's actually my chief of staff now. She manages my calendar. And I say, my goal this year is to say yes. It used to be 50, now it's 25. I don't have as much time. I'm willing to give up 25 hours this year, 25 1 hour meetings. So about every other week, I will look on my calendar, and usually at the end of the day, like right now, or the beginning of the day, we try to bookend them when I can control my day. There's not a lot of company-wide meetings at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I can say yes, but chances are Carly has asked you to move this meeting at least once or twice. Is that true?
I think once.
Once. Okay. You're in the lucky club because this is not one of my top two or three priorities. It's up there. If one of those things has to reclaim time on my calendar, I'll ask Carly, it's like, look, can we push that podcast meeting? Because usually these aren't urgent. They're something that you want to do. I try not to reschedule more than 3 times. And if it's a live event, it gets priority, right? Because people are planning to be there, like this is recorded. So I have in my mind a hierarchy of priorities for what goes on my calendar. And a lot of it is stuff that I'm doing by myself, like writing, or doing with someone, just one person, like my wife. And then there are meetings like this that are probably, like I said, in my top five that I'm regularly scheduling. And I have those time blocks. We call that time blocking. You're making appointments with yourself to regularly do your most important work. Does that help you? That's like a 30,000 foot level of how I manage my calendar. And having a partner like Carly, all I'll say is if you have a virtual assistant, an executive assistant, or a chief of staff helping you with your time in your calendar, you will say no to so many more things. Why? Because they're the ones saying no for you. They will reach out and they'll say, hey, I'm sorry, Jay can't do this at this time. And people were like, okay. And I think if I had to call you and say, hey, Andy, can we reschedule? The pain of having to reschedule would be enough for me to go, well, what the heck? I'm just going to get it over with, even though I really had a higher priority. So it does help to have, if you can afford it, a little bit of help to manage it.
There were so many times I wanted to raise my hand and go to the next question, but I was glad I didn't because you sort of added an extra golden nugget. Um,
There we go. Good.
One thing I've been trialing, so like I sort of just work every day And if something pops up into my calendar, if someone wants to hang out, that's sort of like I might stack that day and make that my day off. And then I think it sort of led to an unhealthy thing where it's like you don't know when your time off is. So like days become a bit unmotivating. So I've started giving myself outs on days I'm just maybe not motivated. I have a list of things like haircut, groceries, buy a new shirt, and like I'm like, okay, if there's a day where I'm just not motivated, I can take the day off and do those things. But you motivated, maybe I should schedule in like a weekly friends catch up or something every day, and then cycle through the different friends and people in Sydney and catch up with them. But then now I'm then thinking like, if I do that, because if I'm meeting more people, I'm going to get more invites to other things. Then I'm going to have to start saying no to things. Or I could just cram them all into that one day and say, hey, sorry, I can't go to your party, but if you want to catch up in a month's time on Wednesday, I could do that. What's your thoughts on scheduled breaks, scheduled meetings, especially for business owners who work at home and don't have a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 routine?
Well, I think you just said the problem at the end. I do think that you need to build a routine so that your brain knows when you're at work and when you're not at work. And it's really hard if you work out of your home. So I have a place in my home that's where I work, and I try not to do other things there. It's not a full-on office, but I've got a spot where I sit and I can write, and it's at a kitchen counter. And when I'm there in that configuration, I'm aware that I'm at work. And I try to be very careful not to work in my bedroom where I'm supposed to be sleeping and relaxing, right? I try to do that. But I've coached people, if you place constraints around your work time, you will be more productive in the time you give it. There's a principle, it's not a law. They call it Parkinson's law, but it's not one. It's just a clever statement that sounds very true and tends to be true, is that work will fill the time that you give it. So if you're self-employed and basically your default is if I'm here and my computer's on, I may be working, you've placed no constraints around your work. And therefore, you never quite know when you are at work and you're not. So I would establish work hours. And I think depending on how your brain works, I know a lot of neurodivergent people, either they need to have short bursts of attention or long ones, depending on which end of the spectrum they're on. I like in the mornings to have longer periods of time to focus, and in the afternoon, more sprints. That's just how my brain works. I figured it out after all these years, right? This works for me, but you have to have breaks. So I would put constraints around your work time. I think you'll be surprised if you really agree with you're not going to cheat. Wow, I'm only going to give myself 7 hours each day to do my work. And if there's a timeline, a deadline or something, there's a reason to do more, I will. But my default mode is I step away from my desk, I get out of the house for a lunch or a walk every day, right? I've got breaks built in. I think a lot of self-employed people fall into this trap of never knowing what part of their day they're in. So they never fully commit to their personal life and they never fully commit to their professional life either. That's what they don't. They think, oh, I'm always working. Yeah, but you're hardly working when you're working. Compare yourself to someone who has a very constrained work schedule. My wife, when she started a real estate career, her first job was to be a mom. We had young kids. She refused to do anything other than drop them off and pick them up herself for the first 2 years, which meant she could only launch her new business between the hours of 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. In her first year, she sold 18 homes, more than 3 times the average of any, I mean, even experienced realtor, because between 9 and 2, she wasn't fooling around. She's like, I don't have as much time as these other people, so I'm not going to hang out and talk by the coffee machine. I'm going to do the things that matter and I'm going to actually prioritize the work. And I remember she got so successful, we had to start hiring a babysitter on Tuesdays and Thursdays because she would have to go on appointments those days. And not everybody could meet her between 9 and 2, which is when she primarily worked. So she also offered up Tuesday afternoons and Thursday afternoons. You look up today, and since she started in 2009, I want to say in her first 2 years, she sold something like 1,300 homes. But it's because she put constraints on her work time. And it's so weird how your brain works. If you say, I only have this much time to do X, it almost like a game. I do that. I place constraints on my email time. I give myself about 30 minutes in the morning. I will put emails usually out. I'll look for anything urgent overnight, and then I will put out some Slack messages and stuff to the world. I generally don't look at it again till noon. When I have my lunch, I'll give myself another 30 minutes. And then when I get off of this call with you, I'm going to try to triage all of my communication channels so I can shut them down for the night. But most of my world knows that they can expect to hear from me in the morning, the middle of the day, and the afternoon. And if they really need me urgently outside of those times, they found a way to get me. So if you do something habitually, you follow a rule and you live your own standards, you actually not you don't just train yourself, you train the world around you. You might be surprised other people who don't have standards will start using yours for themselves instead of forcing you to change them. So I just threw a mouthful at you there. Is that did that generate five questions that you didn't raise your hand for?
It did. Oh, it generated three.
Okay, good, good.
But I'm sort of practicing the one thing and looking at the list of eight questions I have and trying to pick the one that might be the most impactful. I have a really solid day-to-day routine where I wake up at 7, I have an alarm at 4:40, wrap up.
So you
What an
have
awesome
constraints.
job.
Is that your work time? Is that what you're telling me? You try to work between 7 and 4, basically?
Yes, and then in between there might be like a lunch break. I might do a few push-ups throughout the day, and that restriction has helped a lot immensely. Now, I guess the next question is creating a restriction for my week to week, month to month, year to year. Should I be pre-booking that Japan trip a year ahead of time? Because I'm always scared of pre-booking things further out, but maybe I need restrictions on my week to week, month to month, year to year. Any thoughts?
Um, I can't speak to like booking travel because I know that like buying a non-refundable ticket is is a risk far in the future because you just don't know. If you buy a refundable one, you're paying a lot more usually. So I'm going to go a little bit smaller. We usually teach people the first thing you time block every year is your vacation time. I don't know what it's like where you are, but I know Americans habitually don't use the vacation days they have. It's not healthy over the course of our lives and it's not good. But if you're going to do extraordinary things, you need to rest, you need to restore so that you can get the energy you need to do those things. And like right now, I'm even in a busy season. And literally, right before I got on this, my chief of staff, Carly, was kind of reading me the riot act. She's like, I'm going to work with your wife. You're working too hard right now. And I know that you really have to finish the manuscript, but we're also going to schedule some half days because you just have to unplug. She's forcing me to live the standards that I usually try to demonstrate. God bless her. But I would say at the beginning of the year, book some vacation. So Gary used to send me, we do a month at a glance, right? And that's where we start. And then we move everything into our digital calendar. So he would plan out his year. Here are the writing days. Here are our business meeting days. And he would send me those photocopies. But also not just these business meetings that we had. This is Gary Keller, my co-author. I would see a 2-week vacation about every other month. And I remember once I was like, hey, I see that you've got a 2-week vacation coming up in April. Where are you going? He's like, I don't know, but I know I'll need it. And I was like, oh, okay. Tell me more. He's like, it's like putting a rock in a stream. If you block the time to go on vacation, then you don't book that time for other things in the meantime. Work will fall in on either side. Hey, you know what? From the 19th to the 3rd of the next month, I'm going to be somewhere. Can we meet on the 18th or can we meet on the 4th? And you start slotting work around it. Now, when you get closer and you feel safe buying that ticket to Japan, you can buy it a lot closer to the date, knowing the time has already been set aside. Does that help?
That helps a lot.
Book those time off early in the year. Like that's my favorite part of our annual planning. Like we get out our kids' calendars, like when are their vacations? So great. It looks like we can have 3 family vacations this year. And then we have our favorite activities. Like next month, F1 comes to Austin. And I take that Friday off and we like to have that weekend where we go, like, I'm not a gearhead, but I do like watching fast cars go around that racetrack. It's a fun weekend. So we try to plan out some of those vacations, and that gets me excited because I do love to travel. I love adventures. And so my wife does too. That's part of how we fell in love with each other. So we plan out some of our vacations and then, or at least block the time, and then we'll figure out where we're going to go. We had time blocked this year for our annual goal setting retreat. That's another annual ritual is we take a few days, we leave our home. We don't have to go someplace expensive. We just have to get out of our house and we plan 5 years out. We start asking, where do we want to be in 5 years? We have to get out of our environment, just like a business company would. Let's do a retreat. Let's think big for our lives. And we get on the same page about where we want to be in 5 years. And based on that, then we set our annual goals. So Wendy, literally like 2 weeks ago, she's like, we haven't set a destination for our goal setting retreat. We've got these days blocked in October. How do you feel about going to Sonoma, which is the wine country? And I was like, sure. We've only been there once before and I loved it. So let's rent a house and we'll get bikes and we can do our goal setting in the morning and we can take a bike to a winery in the afternoon. Plan made. But that time was blocked at the beginning of the year. We weren't sure how we were going to use it.
How do you go about more spontaneous things such as your favorite band just launched a new tour and they're going to be in your town for the next month, or F1 is in town next month, or maybe a mentor is in town and asks you if you want to get dinner that weekend? How do you go about spontaneous things that are really important to you?
They're important. I cancel things. It's just a fact. Cody Sanchez lives here in town, and she's a really smart entrepreneur. And we've spent some time together. And she sent me a text last week and just said, "Hey, can we go for a walk? I want to talk to you about some stuff." And I was like, "Sure." I said, "Saturday and Sunday mornings are best for a walk, but if you really need it to be on a weekday, just go out a week and I will cancel something and we'll go do it, or we'll get up really early and do it." So if an opportunity shows up, I mean, at a certain point in your life, if you've done the right things and you've built up some success, like my wife and I are owners in about 11 different businesses, and we don't run all of them, but we do have some responsibilities in them, and we support some charities. So we do have a fairly busy life. I usually tell people like you that I meet, I'm like, hey, if you're ever going to be in Austin, let me know. We'll grab a coffee or we'll grab a beer when you're here, but try to let me know a few weeks out. Because if you let me know a few weeks out, I can jigsaw things a little bit in my calendar to make myself available for you. If you tell me, hey, I'm calling from the airport, I'm here, can I drop by? It's going to be really, really hard for me to say yes. But it doesn't take months, right? But it does sometimes, if I get 2 weeks, I can almost make anything work.
Given that you have 11 businesses, Jay, you spend and dedicate a lot of time to writing, and I guess you're basically a writer now. I guess why has that been the one thing that you've dedicated time to? Is it something you just really enjoy doing? Is it a thing you sort of at that chapter of life where you want to share what you, I guess, yeah, tell me about that.
I've always been a book nerd, always. I read books to escape when I was a kid. I worked in bookstores as part of my college, how I earned and paid for my college. I went and got an English degree, a master's degree in English. I worked as a translator briefly overseas, but then I got a job in publishing and I was a book editor before I took a job writing with Gary Keller to be a co-writer on books. So the through line of my life is I am very passionate about books. I've got, gosh, more than 30 years experience building them, editing them, writing them. And for me, my ability to do that well has created all of the other opportunities in my life. If I hadn't written a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, I would not have likely become a senior executive in the world's largest real estate sales company. If I hadn't written a book called The One Thing with Gary that sold, like, those are both million copy bestsellers. They're very validating. This has allowed me to launch a little side business where I can do public speaking. And I'm very selective, but like, hey, cool. I can take my wife. And like last year, no, earlier this year, we got to go to Spain. And I was like, hey, we wanted to go to Spain. Now they're going to buy us a business class ticket, which we probably wouldn't have bought for ourselves. It's not a lot of money, but we get a free trip and that's where we want to go. So that activity, which I love, it is my one thing, is to, I think, create content, especially book content, has opened up all of these other opportunities. I have a job here at Keller Williams. I work with Gary and I run our training company around the one thing. We have a coaching and consulting company. I'm more and more inclined to work at the one thing company more and more of my life because I'm passionate about it. So I probably will narrow my focus even more. But the truth is, your money can do things even if you don't have time to do them yourselves. So the other businesses we own are just investments. So I've gotten to know people. I've made bets on their character and the pro forma, and our money has gone to work in a company that they offered us a chance to invest in. I still have a fiduciary duty to look at their books and to periodically maybe sit in a board meeting or give advice, but I don't have a job there. My main job, and I've aligned it because Gary and I own both of these companies, is I get to work in the real estate company where all of this started. And my job there is a little bit smaller, but my main job is to publish the books because we sell these books through the company. And so running this extra training company is not that big of a deal. So we call it lining up your dominoes. It's like I can't work at a gas station and be a surgeon at the same time. Some things don't line up easily. Now, I say that facetiously. Maybe someone knows how to do that. I know how to line up my job as an author and a creator with a very narrow role around content in this company. I help the founder create his books, publish and sell them, and his speeches and his mastermind, right? It's all content around the books. And I also happen to run the training around one of our books. I spent, gosh, 4.5 years writing that book. And it's been 11 years I've been teaching it every single week. So those are things that I've internalized. So if you stand back and go, wow, that seems like a lot, it's a lot only because it happened in small increments over time.
Given you have a very strict schedule, you've been writing books, basically your whole life, Jay. You dedicate, 3, 4 hours every single day to writing. Is it that you just found something that you're really passionate about and you can do every single day? And after your fifth book, you're still motivated to still wake up each morning, have that sort of 9 to 11, 9 to 1 4 hour period to just write books? Does it ever get mundane? Do you ever lose motivation? Or is that your why, your purpose? And as a result, you can do that forever?
I hope I can do it forever. I mean, there are some days like it's hard. It's really hard and it's exhausting. But we talk about this idea of fulfillment in the one thing. I find it very fulfilling. One of my core values, my purpose, is impact. And I get to read letters and get feedback from people who've read the one thing, and it's changed their lives. About a week ago, someone was reading the book, I think in Ecuador, and I saw the cover. I was like, what country is that? And he goes, I'm reading it in Ecuador. And I asked, how's it going? And he just said, it's changed my life. In the last 6 months, I've achieved more goals than I have in the last 6 years. And I was like, well, that's a writer downer. I mean, I've memorized it. And I was like, that's amazing. Tell me more. But that filled my bucket. Like it totally makes me happy to know that something I co-created, put out in the world, has transformed someone else's life. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving birth to babies, right? I'm not curing cancer, but I can do this and I do it well. And I'm passionate about it. Even the days it's really hard, I'm motivated to know if I do this hard thing, it won't just serve me and my family professionally. It has a chance to do something else. So that's my unique combination. That might not work for you, right? So I think it starts with, you said it, like an exploration of why are you here? What's your purpose? What's your mission? Now, what's connected to that? There's a story called The Rider and the Elephant that didn't make it into the book, but I often talk about it in my speeches. And it comes from a book called The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. And he posed, this kind of theoretical question. He goes, imagine you're watching a nature documentary and they're showing a young boy riding on the back of an elephant through the forest, the rider and the elephant. The boy weighs 40 pounds. The elephant is probably 3 or 4 tons. And he asked the question, is there anything that the boy can literally do to prevent the elephant from going where the elephant wants to go if the boy doesn't want him to? And if you think about that, even for a moment, 40-pound boy perched on a 4-ton elephant, even if they've got a whip or a stick or whatever, there's nothing they can do. They are along for the ride. But we often see that they have like a little bamboo pole and they'll nudge this ear or that ear, and the elephant tends to go. So the author, Haidt, just said what you have to understand in our lives and in this story is that the elephant is our heart and the rider is our head. The rider thinks it's in charge, but the elephant is always in charge. If the elephant goes where the rider wants, if the heart goes where the head wants, it's only because it also wants it. Now, when I first read this story, we were finishing up this book. I realized that I'd never stepped back and really thought about my life and asked, like, why am I here? I'd just been like a goal achiever, like a lot of people looking up and going, that looks cool. Let's go do that. And now I was like, oh, I don't feel bad about that. If I stop, there's probably a line of breadcrumbs that either I can look at or my wife or my best friends, because if the elephant has been guiding me all of this time, I'm not here by accident. I'm probably here for a good reason. My job is now to discover it. So you can ask the question, what are the decisions that I've made that I've been really, really happy about? What are the decisions I've made, like a job you took, a move you made that you felt deep regret? Those feelings of deep fulfillment or deep regret are kind of like the elephant is happy, the elephant was unhappy. And those are clues. And like for me, that pattern almost always was around books, but the key word it was I was happiest and most fulfilled when the work I did was making an impact in the world. And I was like, great. Well, I have something I can do that I've learned how really well how to make an impact, and that's write books. So that's my story. I like the rider and the elephant as a framework because if you haven't done the hard work of identifying your purpose, of figuring out your mission, almost no one has, by the way. Like, so you're not alone. You at least now have some clues on how you could look backwards and realize that your heart has been guiding you, whether you've been completely listening to it or not, might be circumstances. Like some people don't actually have choices. They're born into such circumstances that they are forced to do many things. But for the most of us that get to make a fair amount of choices about how we spend our time, the jobs we choose, etc., there will be good clues.
Interesting, Jay. Do you has your goals stayed the same for the last 10 to 15 years? Being looking for fulfillment, knowing that you want to sort of make an impact with the world, and by doing that through helping people through your books, and I guess therefore every day your one thing is to keep writing?
They've evolved quite a bit. I feel like I've gotten clear about the things I should say yes to. Not everything is a book. Like that's why I use the word content a lot. Sometimes it's a class, sometimes it's a video. But what it is often is me looking at a problem that we tend to find in life and seeing if there's a pattern. If there's a pattern in other people's works that I can simplify and explain a little bit easier. I think the gift that Gary and I have is we're great problem solvers, but we're also practical people. Like I want to understand the world, not for the sense of knowing, right? It's not knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's knowledge for doing sake. So we tend to always want to translate things into action, which is kind of why our books have worked for us, at least. I don't know. I feel like they've evolved. What I have learned is every time I think I'm thinking big, I realize that I could have been thinking bigger. It's so easy to overestimate what we might accomplish this year. And what I forget and again is how easy it is to underestimate how far we can go in as little as 5 years. Our ability to rapidly grow and experience change and have more impact, we underestimate it most of the time. We say, oh, we'll never get there in 5 years. If you do the right things, you might blow through that goal. That's been my experience.
How do you go about goal setting, Jay? Is it just like, I want to create more content, I want to impact X amount of people, and you work backwards from how many people you want to impact, and that number increases each year?
So I alluded earlier that we do a goal setting retreat. And the only page I have memorized in the American edition is page 114. And it's around the focusing question. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier and necessary? And what are the areas of your life we should be using these tools? And for Gary and I, it was in 7 areas. We called it the 7 circles: your spiritual life, for your health, your personal life, your key relationships, your job, your business, and your money. Not everyone has a job in business, right? I gather you're self-employed. So you have a business and you have a job in it, and you might have other contractors that do other jobs in it. Or maybe you do all the jobs and they're just one thing. Doesn't matter. But my wife and I tend to set goals in all of those areas. So when we sit down, yes, we set financial goals. We set professional goals, but we also set health goals. We think about, like, it's really, really helpful at my age. I'm 55, and I look up and I think, 5 years from now, how old will my mom be? How old will my sister be? Frankly, this is getting scary for me. How old will my dog be? Got a 10-year-old dog. 5 years from now, I might not have my dog Taco anymore. And guess what? Just that act of going into the future and realizing that I can't completely control that outcome, but I can control what I do with that individual or that dog or that loved one today. So we set goals in a lot of different areas. And then we really try to narrow it down and say, based on our priorities this year, where are we really going to focus our energies? And so the consistent ones over time have been goals: professional goals, financial goals, health goals, and relationship goals. Because, like, we've been in the sandwich years, is what they call it, when your kids are just starting to go off to college and your parents are getting old enough that they may not be there. They may have health issues. So my wife and I have had, to be doing triage both directions a little bit. And that just requires you to be a lot clearer about what might be happening and plan for it. So we set distant someday goals in those categories. Based on our someday goals, we set 5 year goals. Based on our 5 year goals, we set 1 year goals. And based on our 1 year goals, we make a plan for the following year. And every year, there's more goals than we actually pursue. That's okay. But we have to ask the question, of all of these things that we could do, what are the handful we should really focus on? And sometimes by focusing on the ones that matter, the other ones just kind of happen. And sometimes they don't. And invariably, because every week we kind of check in, and every month we do a deeper check in, and every quarter we do a bigger check in. We're like, how are we doing? What do we need to change? You've got that goal, I've got this goal. We usually look up and we go, man, we thought we were going to do X at the beginning of the year. And we just kind of laugh at ourselves, because when we're planning, right, we get these idea that we can do it all. But then we actually are quite content with where we are. And so we say, should we add it to our list? It's like, nah, we'll do it another day. Like, sometimes it's just aspirational. It's not important. So that's our process. We get away for usually a day and a half so that we can really think big for our lives and not have distractions. We go for walks. We get flip charts out and we imagine. And then based on that, we build a plan for the next year.
I'm going to use the last few minutes we have to quickly burst through 5 questions.
Can I just throw out one thing? And on November 14th to 16th, that goal setting retreat will be facilitating it for the last time. And we're doing it in Austin, Texas. But for, like, just so you're aware, there'll be a live stream. So the hours will be horrible for you, Andy. But it's something that if you wanted to, you could see our process over a day and a half as we guide people through it. It would be available to you.
Thank you so much, Jay, for that.
Okay, rapid fire questions. I'll be short with my answers.
Perfect. Quick question for that exact topic that you just brought up. Let's say I know in 5 years' time my mum would be 65 years old, so I'd want to fit in 2 more holiday trips with the family. Would you recommend pre-booking those 2.5 years out, pre-time blocking those? How do you go about things like that?
I would first reach out and say, hey, mom, you're going to be 65 in a few years. And I fully expect you to live to 95 or 105. But what we do know is that the next few years is when we can do really fun things together, right? You know, I look up and I know that at a certain point, this is not your conversation with your mom. You've got your go years when you have money and you also have your health. You have your slow go years where you have money, but instead of going hiking in the Alps, maybe you take a cruise. And then eventually you get to the no go years. And that's when you're just going and visiting and you're looking through photo albums and you're spending time. But I would just say, let's think big. Let's like, are there trips that you wish you'd always taken? Maybe we can do those together. Let's plan a trip every year that just we can do or I can do with the family. And I just think you have to get buy-in. My family, for many, many years, every other year, we would do a big family vacation. And my mom and dad said, we will pay for the hotel rooms, or we will pay. Usually, we rented a big house or two houses that we could all stay in. Say, we will handle lodgings. You have to get there. And then we would buy groceries and we'd cook and we'd go to see Yellowstone or we would go to some other place. And sometimes we go to France. And like, my kids have seen the world, but it was always subsidized a little bit because my dad was successful, but we also had to have skin in the game. So, like, there's a lot of ways you can make that happen, but you do have to plan for it. Otherwise, you're going to look up and your mom will already be 65. And, my wife is only 53. She just had her hip replaced. You're like, what? You're way too young for that. But now that's limited some of our choices. We still work out. She's still athletic, but like we can't go run marathons now. So if that is something that we hadn't done, we're not going to do it. So get ahead of those things by planning. So just say, Mom, none of us know, it's kind of morbid, but none of us know how long we get. Let's make sure that we're spending some time together. Would you be open to doing some family trips? Or I can just come see you and we'll have an adventure in your hometown. She's
Perfect.
going to say yes, right? But you don't have to pre-book. Remember what we said earlier, your time blocking. That means you have a calendar, you have reminders built in to tell you, hey, in 6 months, like I will go in and have many reminders so that if I have to get visas for my passport, I will do all the research when I'm blocking the time, and then I will put appropriate reminders into my calendar.
I love that. Question two out of the remaining five, and it piggies back on that. I think the root of all my questions probably come from the fact that over the last year, our education company has been bleeding out. We're at a point where we're literally just making payroll each month, and I can't even afford to look 6 months out, even though I feel like that's something I need because I've just been at this every single day for the last 6 months. And thinking of a holiday trip 2 years out and blocking out a month, it's like a month is like so much. That's like so much opportunity costs. And any advice where I'm so blind, should I just keep doing what I'm doing until I get out of it? Or do I need to take a step back and be like, hey, like, let's schedule in some time off, even though that hurts?
Um, there's a great book called The Road Less Stupid. Have you heard of this? By a friend of mine named Keith Cunningham. He's here in Austin. But he believes that the number one culprit for most entrepreneurs is they don't have any thinking time. And that's the time where you do step away from work long enough that you have perspective on it and you can see what's missing and where your opportunities are. So the whole book, I just, before you go buy it, I think it's just like 50 different prompts for you to sit for an hour alone and think about your business in different ways. If you're just barely making it now, I don't know. I don't think it's the hours that you put in your business. If hours were the answer, there wouldn't be people like Gary Keller and Elon Musk, right? Because they're working the same hours or less than I am. Maybe Elon Musk is working more. He's kind of famous for it. But it's not about the number of hours, it's about what they're doing with the hours.
Mm,
So I think the answer for you is that you're probably missing a relationship. There's a coach or a mentor that if you took a little bit of your money and invested it in a bigger perspective on your business, a consultant, a coach, whatever could help you identify the thing that you're currently not doing or doing well enough in order to take the next leap. I find that businesses hit ceilings of achievement. So it sounds like you've hit a ceiling of achievement with your current approach. And approach includes personnel, systems, all of the things. To break through that, you'll need a bigger model. So another cheat for doing it is masterminds. So if there are other people who are in similar industries, businesses that you are, do you have the ability to reach out to them and say, hey, I've been grinding on this for a long time. Would you be open to getting together for a weekend and we all just share our best ideas? There's more than enough. Like most entrepreneurs, unless you're in a very narrow competitive space, they want to talk to their peers. They want to share and get ideas. It's not like I know I can tell you everything you need to do. I can get on a megaphone and tell my whole city to do it, but only a handful will. So it's not like they're going to become my competitors, but hopefully they'll be better for it. But you can get together and mastermind. That would be another strategy for you. Like, I bet you're missing a key insight. So, but don't get trapped into it's about the hours. If you don't take regular breaks, you're going to get a break and it's going to be called a breakdown. Just true in life. So, my assistant, I was telling you, my assistant is coaching me on this. I know I'm really, really focused on the goal and I know when the deadline is and it's just 5 weeks away. But she's like, you won't make it to that finish line unless you manage yourself better between now and then. And she's like, 5 years ago, I started working with her and she was a missing relationship in my life. No one succeeds alone. You're missing someone on your team. You're missing a freelancer, a coach, a mentor, a mastermind group, something. You cannot read the label from inside the box. Get perspective on your business.
I love that, Jay. I'm going to start blocking off either a weekend or a weekday, one day off fully, or even just the morning of one weekend to just sort of have that thinking time and use that time to sort of invite friends or peers, other business owners to like catch up at that specific time. And that could be my Wednesday date night.
Yeah. You say, let's do our Wednesday morning mastermind. We'll meet for coffee. I'm going to get a back room. We'll have a flip chart and you take turns being on the hot seat. And that person, you ask questions. How's your business? Where's your cash flow? What do you think the problem is? And then everybody gives you their advice. And you'll have to be careful about not doing everything they say. But I have three masterminds I attend, and they've been invaluable to me because I get other entrepreneurs' perspective on my business, not just randos from the street, not your customers, right? Who might not like the way you mail things out or whatever. But like these are other entrepreneurs who know what you're dealing with. And they're like, well, are you using ManyChat? I've been hearing that for 2 years. And finally, our marketing person said, I'm not waiting for you to say yes. I'm just going to get it. We're going to start using ManyChat because we are missing opportunities. Like, okay, great. You do it.
I love that. The third question is tell me about this.
Oh, last thing. You said a whole day or a half day. One of our principles is to start with the first domino. And a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs like you, go big. So start small. Just like start with a morning time and then maybe a half day and then maybe a full day. But start with something that you won't undo because you look at your watch and it's 10 a.m. and you're so stressed by the work that you're not doing that you can't actually enjoy being off work. So start small and then let it grow over time.
I love that extra advice. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah. I want it to be effective, right? I like where you're headed, but I want you to be effective.
Yeah, I think I might literally start it tomorrow. Tomorrow there's usually a run club that my friends always has been consistently inviting me to. It's like 5:30 a.m. And then I could do that, lock in an hour where I'm just on my own at the beach, and then maybe one of the friends tag along. If not, it's something I could do on my own each week and really just take a step back. It's a 40-minute drive out. So those have been the objections. I tell myself to not do this run club, but based on everything you shared, it's worth driving 40 minutes out, doing something different, being on the beach, and then I could get back to the office here by 9, 10 and start the day.
Thinking time. Do you know who Sarah Blakely is?
Yes, the
She started
Spanx.
Spanx. Yeah, exactly. I haven't verified this, but I think it's true. But I heard a story from a friend, and she said that when they kind of moved up to their current house, her office is right there. And the first thing she noticed is that she didn't have a commute to her office anymore. And so she started realizing that that was really important thinking time for her. And so she, to this day, evidently, starts her day, says hi to the kids, sends them off to school, then gets in her car and just randomly drives around for 40 minutes and to come back to her home to go to her office. Because for her, that's her creative time, right? She can't talk on her phone, or she could, but she's not scrolling on her phone. She might listen to music, she might listen to podcasts. What she's doing is letting the dots connect. She needed the space for the dots to connect. So maybe on the drive out, you'll you'll have the insight you need, whether you go to the beach or not.
I love that, Jay. The third question I had was tell me about this new book that you're writing, Jay.
Well, it's a real estate book. So we wrote a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent that's really a career book for experienced agents, right? How do I design a business to net me $1 million a year is the question we asked. And we interviewed a lot of the top agents, and it's held up over a long period of time. What we asked this time is I asked those same super successful agents, what did you do in your first year that other agents don't do? And we tried to design a book for new real estate sales entrepreneurs to get from zero to $100,000. So we're calling it the rookie real estate agent, and it's just about a first year success. There's a lot of turnover in our industry. I think something like 60% of new sales agents will be out of the business within 2 years. So it's a very, I mean, it's kind of like any entrepreneurship. There's a very low success rate. And this book could help people make better decisions early on to increase their chances to thrive.
What made you choose to write another real estate book? Why not do a more general book such as, say, money management, day-to-day routines, habits? I guess you already have one for goal setting. What decision led to you writing another real estate book?
Well, like my partner, Gary Keller, is the founder of Keller Williams, the largest real estate company under one brand. And that's where I spend a lot of my time.
Mhm.
So we were looking up and we were asking if we could write one book right now that would help this company the most. So one, we know who our audience is. We know who their problems are. We know that roughly, I want to say something like 300,000 new agents show up every year. So it's a little bit like Disney. You know, every 7 or 8 years, they can put the same movies out and have a brand new audience of young kids. So it's got a good long-term audience that we know how to serve. So a lot of things lined up. And I also have a couple of young writers on our team, and interviewing other young agents was right up their alley. So it just lined up a lot of things. There are other books that I would want to write, but this one felt like right now. And because of the nature of the book, my team has been researching it for over a year, but I've only had to actively be involved for about 6 months. So I can show up, get all the interviews, we have the outlines, we could pull it together, and then I can pull things together rather rapidly.
I love that, Jay. The last two questions we always wrap up these podcasts with. One, any recent discoveries that you have implemented to your day-to-day life?
So in this hard season, there's a lot of other stuff happening. Um, I've implemented a new rule with my team because a lot of my team in the last month or so, we lost a teammate, and it's been tough. And so I've just had to give them a way to back off of our standards. They want to do well. They want to knock it out of the park every single day. So one of our mantras is done is good and good is great. And I'm not going to say that for the book we're writing, but for all of the little priorities that we have to do. Did we answer the emails on time? Right? Did we pull together some slides for that presentation? We have all of the work that has to get done that's not really the 20% work. And I'm trying to let them know that during this period of time when they're stressed, what I don't want them is to burn themselves out. Trying to be great all the time when we're not in a good position to be great all the time. Let's be really tough on our priorities, focus the big part of our energies on the handful of things that actually matter. And for the rest, done is good and good is great. So it's actually quite refreshing. I know people that want to optimize everything, and that's kind of exhausting to me. I want to optimize the things that matter most, my marriage, my health, right? My leadership skills. And the rest of the stuff can just be good enough. And I'm okay with that. So that's a radical way for me because I'm kind of an achiever. So it took a shift in my mindset to allow myself that. And that's why I'm having to give my people permission. I attracted a lot of people that really want to gold plate their work.
I love that, Jay. And then the last question, any personal goals or focus for the next 6 months?
Well, the one thing, about a year and a half ago, I looked up and our company needed a refresh. My co-founder had stepped aside to do some new work. And in the interim, I just started digging in. And so the next 6 months, as part of this big push we've been a part of, I'll be taking over the One Thing podcast. I've never had that job. I've had the privilege. I mean, we're at almost 500 episodes, and I've done dozens of them, but it was never my job. I stepped back into the CEO chair, and we've just taken down all of the products that didn't have great value. I've been doing multiple customer interviews every week to get really clear, really clear. There's what we thought they wanted, and then they're telling you what they actually want. So I made a commitment to do 50 one-on-one interviews with our customers over a month, which is a lot to squeeze into a busy calendar, by the way, and really get clear right at the finish line. And then we're about to release a whole new slate of products. But we're going to go from like, we had 11 core products and about 10 secondary ones a year and a half ago. We're going to have about 4 products now. And I feel really good about that. It's been a long season. But if you go to theonething.com, you'll start to see the changes roll out between now and January.
I love that, Jay. Jay, where can people get more of you?
Well, theonething.com is kind of the home base for our book. Every Friday, I write a very short newsletter called The 20 Percenter. And that's at the20percenter.com, and it's free. And I just write it for entrepreneurs. There's a little bit of a real estate slant, but that shows up maybe every 6 weeks. It's mostly about the entrepreneurial mindset and different strategies for success.
I love that, Jay. Thank you so much for your time today. You're definitely so passionate about all the topics you talk about, but at the same time, you're so caring. I really appreciate how you really, cared about the questions I've asked, and you really, you would put your hand up, be like, by the way, we're doing a live conference. The time zone might be really horrible for you, Andy, but you should show up. And you're sort of like really focused, but kind. People who are focused, usually they might seem maniacal, but you sort of really do have this kindness that comes with the focus. And like, I've done 3-hour podcasts in the past, and you're definitely the person that I could talk on forever and ever with, because you just have this wealth of knowledge. So thank you for your time today.
We'll have to come back and we can do it again. But I want to hear what you change in your business to break through this ceiling. So go make some changes in your business. Like in every business, like over 10 years, there will be 5 years where you think you're a genius. There'll be 2.5 years where you're pretty sure you're going to be out of business, and 2.5 years that are just hard. So maybe you're in one of those periods that's not the 5 genius years right now. Like that's just normal business, right? About half the time you're like, woohoo, I'm amazing. About a quarter of the time you're like, we're doing okay, but I'm a little insecure about whether I'm really that good. And then some of the time you're just going to be going, what am I doing? What am I doing? I need help. That's normal because the environment's always changing and we have to adapt our products to our customers. It's hard, or everybody would do it. So give yourself some grace, get some perspective on your business. And I would love to circle back, if nothing else, for you to tell me, we talked on this date and here's the things that I did, because that would probably be really instructive for your people, your tribe, right? To also for you to have to articulate that.
I'd love that. I love that, Jay. One thing I would quickly add in, when you share that, this apparently a friend told me about a 7-year rule. Apparently on the 7th year, a lot of musicians, athletes, the 7th year is that pivotal moment where they either go back and get a 9-to-5 job or continue being an athlete or a musician. And I'm sort of at that 7th year, and the last 2 years have been really, really rough. And you're right, the first 5 years felt amazing. So you've sort of like been able to guess a lot of things without me saying it throughout this whole conversation.
There's a lot of patterns in life, right? So there's a thing called the 7-year itch, and it used to be about marriage, not careers. And most marriages that were going to end in divorce would happen before that period of time. I've just passed my 25th anniversary, and I can tell you there were times when it was really tough and a lot of work. But when you work through that down cycle and you get back on your trajectory again, you have this whole different feeling about what down cycles are. If this is your first kind of plateau moment, you don't know if it ever ends, right? You're like, maybe it never ends. Like, when do I pull the plug and just go to greener pastures? And sometimes that is what you have to do, right? Sometimes we see our friends and we're like, just quit, buddy. You're banging your head against the wall. This is never going to work. I don't believe that about you. I just want to acknowledge that that does happen. But if you power through to get to the other side, now you have this whole new understanding that all businesses go through that. Not all businesses make it to the other side. So I expect that you will, and we'll see what it looks like on the other side.
Thank you so much, Jay. Hope you have a beautiful day and beautiful week. Thank you so much for doing this. Guys, if you made it this far into the episode, hope you guys got a ton of value from today, and I'll see you guys next week on another episode of the podcast. Peace. I know we went over time, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. This was such a fun episode. I'm definitely gonna email you random little tidbits that I take from this conversation and keep you updated. And I definitely would want to do a revisit and do like a part 2 sometime in the future.
Sounds great. Just make some progress so you'll have something to report back to me.
Yes, I will. Thank you very much, Jay. Really appreciate your time.
Have a great day. Thank
Bye.
you.